Hello, everyone. I'm Adrian Sanabria, host of the Enterprise Security Weekly podcast and principal researcher at the Defenders Initiative. Welcome to this webcast sponsored by Rubrik. I'm joined today by Noam Perel, Field CTO for Data Security at Rubrik. And today we're talking about minimizing data security risks during Microsoft Copilot adoptions. If you have a question during this webcast, you can select the Q&A button below. If we have time, we'll get your questions answered live. There's also a chat button down there that you can use to chat with the rest of the audience, or you can answer questions there. I'll be checking both throughout the webcast. And we also have a handout for you. If you click that second button from the right, that'll let you access the handout. I believe it's a PDF titled Rubrik's Data Security Posture Management for Microsoft 365 Copilot. So it's a nice takeaway that you can use there for more information after this webinar. All right, we will have a few slides that we're just going to use to kind of outline and explain how a lot of this stuff works. So we'll bring those up as needed. But starting off, Noam, first of all, Noam, welcome to the webcast. Great to have you here.
Thank you, Adrian. Thanks for having me. Real pleasure. Looking forward to today's conversation.
Me too. This is it's an exciting area. I've been very interested in the DSPM area since it came out. I think there's a ton of use cases and problems that it can solve for us. And so starting off, let's just bring folks up to the present with Rubrik in case there are people who are familiar with pre-Laminar Rubrik as opposed to current day. So just bring us up to date there with what Rubrik does and what we're going to be talking about today, what product area.
Yeah, absolutely. So a bit of history. So Rubrik came out really disrupting the backup space. Traditionally, Rubrik started with better backup. Then what happened in the industry actually changed and transformed Rubrik into a cybersecurity company with the introduction of ransomware into the world. So what happened was actually Rubrik customers came to Rubrik saying they were being hit by ransomware. And now how can the Rubrik backups help? So say your data is encrypted or even destroyed, you've got your backup. The problem with ransomware attacks is that in many cases, if you just restore from your backup, then you reinfect the environment. And then Rubrik came out with capabilities to identify the clean copy, a clean state, so that you know where that point of infection started, so that you recover quickly and recover and get the business up and running and not reinfecting the environment. Rubrik then started doing these capabilities, applying them on cloud. And then we're arriving around the time of the acquisition, right? We're really fast forwarding here to an acquisition in the DSPM space with Laminar. I joined Rubrik rather recently with the acquisition. I joined Laminar day one. I joined the two co-founders, come from a background of engineering. And what we tried to do was tackle the problem of data rapidly growing in the cloud. So the term DSPM is actually quite new. We, together with Gartner, actually are the first ones to phrase this term. There were now what you call, or what others are saying, DSPM players. They were legacy data security players focused on on-prem. We focused on cloud with the idea around 3 years ago, how can we bring the agentless approach to cloud data? How do we rapidly catch up with data changes in the cloud? So how do we project cloud native capabilities on trying to keep up with data changes and, say, access changes in the cloud? Now, partnering with Rubrik, what we've been able to achieve is not only just focusing on cloud, but it's being able to expand on your cloud, your SaaS, and your on-prem environments. Hence the phrase DSPM everywhere, knowing what data you have, knowing who can access it, and knowing what is actually happening to your data. So for me, truly privileged to be acquired and partnering with Rubrik, because the focus is with Rubrik is always data. That's the focus. Now, Adrian, to today's conversation, if we think of what I said about DSPM, which is knowing what you have, so classifying the data, then understanding who can access what, understanding what puts your data at risk, who's interacting with your data, this fit in magically, or perhaps not magically, just simply fits in with an AI initiative that many organizations have. And specifically, we can address, and I'd love to talk today about the Copilot initiatives. So,
Yeah, absolutely. And
go ahead.
oh, sorry, I thought you were finished.
No, you're good.
Yeah, so I was just gonna queue it up for you, but I've done a lot of advisory calls with a lot of organizations doing a pilot of Copilot, and certainly the top concern that comes out every time is, we're not sure of all the data that we're going to give this thing access to. We're not sure if access permissions are right. Particularly in places like SharePoint and in OneDrive and places that become dumping grounds for different types of data, even places where the data should be structured. We're finding folks early on with tools like AI tools like Copilot that they're finding things that they shouldn't have access to. They're finding data hygiene problems, data governance problems, and so I believe this is where Rubrik comes in to assist here, right?
Yes, that's absolutely. So what we're seeing with this AI trend, which I think there's a lot of upside to it, but the problem is that now the business is pushing security folk to adopt Copilot. So just roll it in, allow the business, but there's a big problem with exposing all this data, right? So there's this tension that is now happening with the rollout of these projects, with organizations, specifically the security organizations, understanding that, well, if we don't have control of our data, what are we actually exposing to this Copilot? And then the end users, because what you said, it's a dumping ground, they might be able to ask any question that traditionally they had to be maybe a bit malicious to get this information, right? So anything that they had access to in the past, they might not have known it. But Copilot runs the query for them and just retrieves the answer on anything they could access. So now naively, an employee that does not need to ask a specific question, or they can ask, but they're not supposed to get the specific answer, the employee will just see data that they're not supposed to access. And this
Yep.
brings us to, I just would love the audience to see the problem as visible as can get, and then we'll talk about the solution as well. So the problem is rather straightforward, right? If I look at it this way, let me just share just one slide here.
Sure. Yeah.
If we look at the problem is the following. Before having control over the access, we don't even have to just mention Rubrik. Before just knowing what we have, if we look to the right here, if we look at our 365 estate, we don't know what we have in any of these files. We just know we have SharePoint sites. Adrian, I just got off a phone with a customer saying that also it's not just the SharePoint sites, it's the OneDrives that are simply being used to share folders with colleagues. So you don't know what your OneDrive, what your SharePoint sites, we don't know what data is where. And then potentially Cheryl from marketing can ask a query on this data that is here and using Copilot, and she'll get an answer. Now, this could be sensitive, this could be not, this could be publicly shared. Data is everywhere and we don't have control over it. Do you see this happening with organizations?
Yeah, in fact, I was on an advisory call with a company the other day and talking to them about the importance of adversarial prompts, of trying to access things you shouldn't have access to on purpose. Well, at
Mm.
least for the security team, so they can be the first to discover that, yes,
Interesting.
indeed, they do have data hygiene problems. Because essentially, that's what they're left with. That's how some companies are trying to discover this stuff, is very manually, by saying, do I have access to HR data? Do I have access to secrets? In fact, while I was on this advisory call the other day, uh, one of the people I was talking to just started typing in these adversarial prompts and said, "Show me passwords," and got
Wow.
back from SharePoint a file that had plain text passwords in it. It was clearly intended to
Wow.
be a database configuration file for an
Right.
application. So it had a list
Uh-huh.
of databases and credentials to log into those databases, like a JDBC file or an ODBC file that you might find on a server. But for whatever reason, for convenience, because Cheryl needed to get it to Evan or whatever the case is, somebody
Yeah.
put it on SharePoint. And the easiest way to ensure someone gets data is to open up the access controls as much as possible, right? Everyone full control.
Yeah. Yeah. It honestly, it's just, I find that, you know, organizations just aren't necessarily aware of the risks. So again, it could not, like, it didn't necessarily have to be malicious. Sometimes it's just laziness, is just finding what's easy without realizing the implications. Like, and if you think of what you just mentioned, the config file or the password file, that's what the attackers need to just get in, get credentials. You don't need to find all these crazy vulnerabilities out there, and we think about the
Yeah.
vulnerabilities and about crazy attacks. Sometimes it's just these stolen credentials that allow them
Yep.
to gain access to the most sensitive environments.
I
So
do a lot of analysis of breaches, and I will guarantee you almost every company out there larger than a certain size probably has plain text credentials in a file somewhere.
yeah,
And attackers do find those files.
for sure. Yeah, I mean, these could be just the low hanging fruits, and I just it's crazy, and in many cases, it starts with just knowing what you have. Just mapping is
Yeah.
is the first step, right? So first step, before we did anything with access, before we did even with the public sharing of files, first thing that we offer customers, and that I urge customers, rubric or not, start with a data governance program, start with a data security program, knowing what you have. Knowing. So before we didn't know what we have, look at the right hand side, and then step
Yeah.
one, just know what you have. And I'll even add on top of that, last week I had a conversation with a colleague. She works at a large financial institution, and they have not even defined what some organizations call as the crown jewels. What is the
Mm.
most sensitive information, right? So, okay, how do you even start with classification before you know where the sensitive data should be, and how do you even define it? So step one for organizations is understand what's sensitive for your business. It could be your PII, PCI, PHI if you deal with health data, but could it be sensitive business data, something that is specific to the business? Start with defining that, and then when you utilize a tool to do data classification, you will understand where your marketing assets are and where your HR assets are. So that's phase
Yeah.
one. Phase two, we can do two things. One, if you look at the bottom here, we see this publicly shared file, this publicly shared link. We can eliminate it. And what we can also do is, by integrating with the purview labels, we can apply the labels for our customers. They can use our tool to do this. We find that getting proficient enough in purview to actually make it work for the customer is something very difficult, which is why using our platform, we simplify the whole process of classifying data, integrating with purview, and then applying those labels. Because once you do these two things, applying the labels, removing public access or even walk-wide access, what we achieve is the following. Now we've deployed Copilot, and while Cheryl creates the question, prompts Copilot, she gets a response only according to the data that she should have access to. So this allows a safe rollout for Copilot. And I think this is in a 1, 2, 3 step. Clearly, you need a program in place. You need to know what's define what's sensitive. You need to set the goals. But this is a 1, 2, 3 program that we encourage our customers to at least start thinking about to allow or to alleviate all this pressure coming from the business to roll out Copilot as fast as possible.
And just to clarify a little bit, in case people here aren't familiar with Copilot or Microsoft 365 yet, Microsoft will push you to use Purview when you complain about this problem, or just by default. Maybe as you're getting started with Copilot, they will recommend to you that you use Purview for data labeling, and Copilot will obey those data labels. But of course, the struggle here is, again, I'm doing a lot of these advisory calls where people come to me and say, hey, Microsoft says to use Purview, but how am I going to label all this stuff? There's hundreds of thousands of files, if not millions of files and folders and objects that I need to label here. How do I do that at scale?
Yeah, and I agree. It's with Purview, we don't seek to compete. On the contrary, we want to enhance your Purview project. We offer not having a team that is super proficient and very, very senior to get this benefit from Purview. What we offer is by integrating with Purview and then applying these labels, you don't need to rely on the end users tagging the data, which in many cases does not work out well for organizations because people are not aware or don't care enough, to be honest. And also, you don't need to rely on your team to then govern that, do this manual governing of making sure that the labels are indeed applied and applied correctly. So all this is how we can work with Purview and actually make it go to work for our customers. And in addition, Adrian, I'm intrigued if you did see customers utilizing Purview successfully. What was a way that you found there, and is it even out there?
Yeah, no. In fact, I haven't talked to anybody who's really even rolled out Microsoft 365 Copilot across their organization yet. Every company I've talked to is still just doing pilots. If they are paying for it, it's smaller niches of folks. It's like test groups of folks. And I haven't talked to anybody yet, that had figured out how to do Purview at scale. Definitely talked to some who had started that journey and were struggling with it, which is why they're talking to me, why they're asking about this. And before we prepped for this webinar, I didn't realize Rubrik was doing this. So this is a huge help for me having those conversations, knowing that DSPM is one of these solutions, particularly from Rubrik that can help to automate some of this process. Because I think that's really, once you scale out, that's where the challenge comes in. So, I wonder if your customers, in the slides you presented, you've got marketing and HR, is there kind of a structured way that people are going at about labeling things, discovering data? Would you recommend they do the whole organization at once, or maybe break it up and do it department by department?
Yeah, that's a fair question. And I'll say, if you would have asked me 2 years ago if we would help an AI Copilot rollout, I would have said, not really sure. Yeah. But honestly, this is where I love to learn from customers about the need. And then when we saw the fit that, hey, yes, we do the classification, we can integrate with the labels and then apply them. Hey, we have a win-win here, both for the customer utilizing Purview and then obviously us helping our customers. Now, when it comes to a full rollout, here's what we suggest. First is we need to define together what's sensitive. So yes, we have our classification mechanisms that will work out the box for the customer.
Mm-hmm.
Plug and play. You really don't need to configure anything. This is one of our core architecture principles. The tool has to run automatically without you configuring, telling it where to scan, what to scan. I will say there could be business identifiers that the customer wants us to look for, some specific business files that are sensitive to the business and are not sensitive to other customers, right? So this is, as part of that crawl phase, is defining what's sensitive to the business on top of your PII, PCI, PHI data. That's phase one. Now, in terms of rollout, it depends. When we think of your mid-market companies, then it's easy enough to use the tool so that it runs on everything and there's no worry there. But when we look at the large enterprises, absolutely, we should start with breaking down, making sure the tool works there, that the labels are working properly, streamline the process, and then project it into other departments and also other environments as well. Right, Adrian, we talked about pushing this into cloud as well. So something that Microsoft actually loved that we offer our customers is, if we find Microsoft documents inside of, say, S3 buckets in AWS, we could apply the labels there as well. So that, again, the downstream DLP effects of the Microsoft policies apply there as well. But that would be in the next phase of the project. I agree. Like, start with a smaller scope and then expand.
Yeah. Yeah. So just to go back and kind of round up the restate the process here. Sounds like data discovery, is maybe less of a concern here. Like with if we're talking about Copilot, we know where the data is, so that's a little bit easier. But it's nice that you can do this in the cloud as well, and I assume all the major clouds are supported there. But yeah, a company would have to have a data classification policy, or at least some idea of how they want to classify data, but before going forward with this. And then your classifiers are going to create those buckets, right?
Correct. But before that, I would claim that, even as you mentioned, the dumping ground of 365, you have data in 365, a lot of it is sensitive, but where SharePoint sites have what? What are the end users dumping inside of their OneDrives that is not adhering to company policy? I'll give an example. It could be just your people just back up their entire emails, or people just dump data from different environments into their OneDrives because it's super easy to just store something or share it with their peers when it's in OneDrive. Less controlled, less visible by teams. So I will claim that we do see organizations really baffling with just knowing what they have, obviously understanding that it's sensitive in 365, but how do you gain control over where is that and who has access to it is what we see a lot that's out there.
Yeah. Now we do have a comment from the audience that Copilot and Purview are already pretty expensive. I don't know if you're prepared to talk like what the pricing model is, but I will say I've made the prediction that I don't think Microsoft is going to have success with charging for Copilot separately long term. And I've made the prediction. I think I think in a couple of years we'll see Copilot just built into E5, G5 into the existing licenses, rather than charging $360 a year per employee extra for it. I think they'll keep on charging extra for Purview though, but that's just my prediction, is that they'll have a hard time selling Copilot as a separate thing and not a feature of Microsoft 365 that's built in.
No, it is interesting, and it's interesting to see what will come out of Ignite in terms of what they're doing.
Yeah, that's coming up, isn't it? December?
Yeah, literally nowadays it's happening right now. So it's
Oh,
interesting to see what Microsoft will come out with. I will say in terms of packaging and pricing, we see customers really hesitant going into the E5 licensing because it's so expensive. So what we do is two things. If you don't have an E5 license, we can help you leverage Purview into those capabilities as well. If you do have E5, well, how do you start using it? How do you utilize those capabilities? Again, so it's us enhancing any idea of or any need of Purview that you have. If you don't have any Purview project, no problem. We don't have to integrate with that. At least we'll know what data you have and we'll restrict access that is not needed. So depending
so
on
that's a
that,
really good point. Purview is not required for you to help out here, right?
yeah, definitely not required. But so many organizations are being pushed to use it that we say, hey, we're here to help. We don't necessarily want to just push our solution. We want to provide a solution to the customer problem. Purview does have a lot of benefits, especially with the downstream ones. If we think of your RMS project, again, big promise. I still haven't seen a successful RMS project being utilized, but there is a promise. So let's make that baby step, and at least getting those labels up and running is something that I just saw huge potential over the last years with our customer. So this is what we can kick off for them. When it comes to pricing, to the exact pricing, reach out to your rubric teams. But I will say you'll be pleasantly surprised when you have this discussion.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm kind of curious in terms of time scale. Again, like how long do you see companies taking to go through this project? You know, because we do have to. There's going to be this big discovery period, right? You know, why is that data there? Why is this data here? Like, what do we need to do with the data governance piece? You know, before we move into enforcement and things like that. You know, how do you see companies kind of keeping this moving along, and how long is it generally taking them to work through these different stages?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the initiation of the tool is super important. And I think with dealing with other tools, when you deal with a tool like Rubrik, you'll be amazed at how fast it will start running, parsing the different files, understanding what you have. That's in a matter of days, you'll get an initial understanding. But then to properly know what labels you have, educate your end users that this will be labeled by another tool, that's another few month project there as well. I still have not seen a successfully full-blown RMS project, so I can't tell you because I still have not witnessed this. But I will say that starting from the first month, you can tackle your biggest risks, your biggest data risks, because you'll get a very quick understanding of what data you have. Then starting from a month to 4 months, you can start applying the labels, as we mentioned before, scope on a specific scope. And then from 4 to 7 months, I would say that you can start applying the labels throughout your organization, really making sure that it works. I'll say, and now here I'll share with the audience and I'll share with you, Adrian, we didn't speak about this, that we're also looking at another phenomena which deals with, again, data being at our core, is looking at rot data. Rot stands for redundant, obsolete, and trivial data. We find data that has not been used, has not been accessed, perhaps it can be deleted, right? So what we're going to do with harnessing Rubrik capabilities, because Rubrik can back up your 365 estate as well, is perhaps first thing, you can archive data, and then if it's not needed, it will be removed from the environment. By this, we spare the cost of not growing your 365 estate, and we obviously reduce the risk of data that's not being needed just can be removed from the environment. So this is a huge project that we're undertaking as well for customers, is identify what's not even needed. Right? So this is an amazing byproduct of the project with us. Honestly, when we started, we were not sure of how much data we'll find that's redundant. We sometimes find 20 to 30% redundant data in our customer environments that can just be removed.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point, and I think it's something that's much easier to do from a, with a solution that can then recover that data if you're wrong, because the
Yeah.
fear is what if I delete this and it ends up being critical. All of a sudden, it becomes much easier to do that, maybe even in an automated fashion. If you're looking at the last time used for the data. But I think it is a shift in just business thinking, because at one point in time, data was seen as very valuable, and in many ways it still is. And so you would hang on to as much as you could because you might need it in the future, right? There's almost this hoarding mentality with data, particularly customer data. And now, thanks to GDPR, FTC, SEC, like the complaint that we saw from the FTC and the sanctions that they put on a company called Drizzly after they had a breach, we now see this heavy focus on delete it if you don't need it. Particularly if it's data that belongs to customers. And we're starting to now see that shift in people perceiving data as a potential liability. I mean, yes, it still has value to the business. The business can still make money off of it, but it can now go in both directions. It can go below the zero mark. It can have negative value to the organization. It can become a liability.
Yeah, absolutely. The liability is actually threefold. So I thought of two, and then 2 weeks ago, a CISO that I had a conversation with, he mentioned to me the third one. So the first two is what we mentioned, right? More data equals more risk, and also just pure cost, right? Why do you have to increase your 365 capacity quota if you can just remove that data? That's the customer coming to us with an urgent need to not go over a specific quota. No problem. Our tool can find this raw data. This can be removed. The third thing, though, that was new to me, or it's not completely new, but at least it's a new realization, is that when you have so much data, if you have a breach, you will need to report on what happened. This is more time to respond to that breach, to say what data was impacted. So the less data you have, the faster you can actually respond to that breach by knowing what was the impact. So that was new to me. Have you thought of it this way, Adrian?
No, that's new to me as well. Yeah, it's
Okay.
so I have seen companies in the past. One of the tactics that we've seen attackers use is they take other people's data breaches and they claim it's yours and they try and get a ransom out of it. So there's all kinds of leaked data out there that you can cobble
Right.
together,
Yeah.
and so authenticating that it was your data, your customer's data, or your employee's data that was stolen can be difficult. So I see people inserting canaries into their data sets. So maybe every week they put the name of a fictitious person in their database or something like that. And they swap that
Right.
out every week. So when somebody claims to have the data set, I can go look, and if I see, Tweety Bird, I know it is our data, and the leak happened in September, versus if it doesn't have that ear marker, that kind of watermark, that don't use Tweety Bird. That's kind of obvious as a it's
Yeah.
an actual canary. But you get the idea. There's this fake bit of customer information in there that's kind of a secret, um, um, ear marker or visual marker for you to know that yes, this was your data set. It came from this
Yeah.
database during this time period, and that comes in really handy because they will try to fake it. They will try and
Huh.
pretend that you've had a data leak when you haven't, and they'll go to journalists too, and they'll say, "Yeah, we hacked them and we grabbed all the data," when none of that actually happened.
No, you gave me a great idea. I think we should look into this. We should look into identifying these canaries for our customers so that we know where they are, how they're being interacted, not just from the canary perspective, but from a vast scope perspective that we look at. That's interesting. You gave me a great idea to talk and to bring to our
It's
product
a
teams.
concept of a honey token. You could call it a honey token as well. I think
Right.
traditionally honey tokens have some kind of component that phone home, but this isn't
Mhm.
something that would need to phone home. This is more of just a like a watermark is how I think of it, like an invisible watermark.
Yeah, no, I love it. The question is that comes to mind is how do we integrate that effectively so that we bring this visibility for our customers as well. So I like that. It's a good idea.
So another thing I wanted to mention is,
Yeah.
a lot of these conversations I'm having about Copilot, I think just because it's already natively integrated into the Microsoft Graph and into Microsoft 365, the assumption certainly by Microsoft and by some customers is, if I'm already using Microsoft 365, why would I go with any other solution? But I'm honestly hearing from a lot of folks that they're going to stick with Microsoft 365, but they're going to use an Anthropic or they're going to use an OpenAI for a variety of reasons, and they're finding more value there because they can still interact with their data. You can upload, if I want ChatGPT to tell me something about a spreadsheet, I can upload that spreadsheet into ChatGPT for that chat session and ask it questions about it. Um, it's a little bit less convenient, but a lot of these other AI solutions are cheaper, and it's been easier for users. I've heard a lot of a lot of bugs in the Microsoft ecosystem where the spreadsheet is sitting right there in the root of their OneDrive, but they try and ask questions about it, and Microsoft's like, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't see any file by that name. Or
Yeah.
any data that matches that description. So just because it's a little bit more implicit, the use case, and again to highlight that rubric isn't necessarily tied to the like you can still scan your data. Like I would imagine using Copilot's not a prerequisite to do what you're talking about doing with rubric. You could do it with Microsoft 365 regardless, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So the tool will be able to scan your data. So you mentioned it could be on your Azure cloud as well. The tool can scan the data there, it can scan the data in AWS, GCP, on-prem, Salesforce, right? So we can scan data throughout different environments so that if you do want to utilize that data, Adrian, you gave the example. For me, it's just one use case, right? An LLM. And you want to use that data, definitely you can harness the tool's capability for it. When I see LLMs, I had an interesting discussion. Actually, it started on LinkedIn. I saw someone mentioning AI and looking at LLMs and their security only from an application perspective, looking at the vulnerabilities of the application, etc. And I challenged him by saying that yes, the LLM is an application, but I think it deals with other forms of security. Clearly, I'm biased towards data security. So I think the LLM, the questions you need to be asking is, hey, what are you inputting? What is the output as well? Because in many cases, the industry is saying garbage in, garbage out. I will claim that sometimes it's good stuff in, still garbage out, and you might need to know of that,
Yeah.
right? So it's that data that's feeding the models, and it's also, well, who is accessing the models, who's accessing the output of the models. So it's actually tying the three layers of the application and then together with the data and identity, right? Regardless of the specifics of Copilot, this is how again DSPM matches an AI governance project by knowing what data you're feeding, what's the output, and then again, who can access it. But to be
Yeah, and
fair,
I
to be
think that.
transparent, yeah, go ahead.
But no, finish your thought there. You said
Yeah, I
to be
just
fair.
like to be fair to anyone listening. Um, Obviously, like an AI security approach has to be set cross segments. You need to involve your application security, your vulnerabilities as well. Like, it's not just a data approach. I do think that AI highlights the need for a data first approach, because first and foremost, what is feeding the models, right?
Yeah, and that's where I was going with my comment as well. Is back when I was an industry analyst at 451 Research, I predicted that data security would be one of the last things that we tackle as an industry, because it's so difficult, because it's so sprawling, because it's constantly growing and evolving. Um, and back then, like just that comment you brought up earlier of getting rid of data, of having a data lifecycle where data is deleted, never occurred to me. Because every company I'd ever worked for obsessively saved everything. And in fact, I remember if you searched around on our file servers, you would find managers' PST files from a decade ago or earlier. If PST files are just like a mailbox, like Outlook would let you save your old mail, because once we instituted a legal hold policy where you had to have some kind of justification, or there had to be a legal reason for you to hold on to any emails older than a certain amount of time, all of a sudden everyone started dumping their emails into these PST files and storing them everywhere, anywhere they could find storage. Like, we found PST files everywhere, and by default they weren't encrypted. And emails have so much data, so many different kinds of data in them. So it was just a huge liability. And even then, like I never thought, why don't you just get rid of this stuff? Because I also had that same, like, I'm afraid of getting rid of any data. I want to keep all the data forever just in case. But yeah, I think this has, this is kind of the reckoning. AI, is kind of forcing us to confront our data hoarding tendencies and our old bad habits. And I think this is the right moment to to finally tackle that problem. It's not going to be an easy problem to tackle for a lot of folks, but the fact that we actually have some better tools to do this work now, I think makes it achievable. Tackling this kind of data cleanup project, getting data governance handled, and understanding those data flows. Who needs access to what. So you also have. That kind of brings me to Rubrik has a zero data trust security architecture. Do we want to maybe say a few things about that?
Yeah, of course. So specifically, you made me smile when you mentioned the PST files, because it's one of the first things we find when we crawl through a 365 environment. We find it in abundance. Worked with the governance team, and they were like, yeah, we're not supposed to have any PST files, so if you find any, just let us know. We found hundreds, of PST dumps just in abundance, really. And I if going back in time, I think you really you saw the future well, and I think, to be fair towards the entire industry, if you think about the on-prem world, you thought about the premise, it was all about your networking and your firewalls to keep the bad guys out. Now we moved into cloud. There were thoughts about, okay, we lay the foundations. Have we configured the infrastructure correctly? Are there vulnerabilities, right? And I'm not taking a bit of those tools. Absolutely essentials to try and keep the data, the bad guys out, to try and keep them from getting to the data. But with Rubrik, what we're doing is very simple. We're assuming breach. They will get those stolen credentials. We talked about the config file. They will utilize new vulnerabilities. They will utilize mix of.
And just to interject real quick, if you look at the Verizon data breach report, I think it's something like 40% of all data loss incidents are accidental. It's not malicious in the first place. It's an accidental data leak. People misplace data, they leave S3 buckets open, they lose laptops. So sorry, continue there.
No, for sure. So it's what I'm trying to say is you need to assume breach in many ways. You do need to make it difficult. You need to put your walls up, absolutely, but you will be breached in one way or another. And if you will be breached, now what do? Right? Or you put all these defense mechanisms, but an identity was compromised. Now I have access to it. What do? Right? So first is utilizing the approach of knowing what we have. So once the identity is compromised, well, maybe it's not overly accessing anything it can, right? So reduce your data footprint. Move the data to where it's supposed to be. Have control over it is step one. Step two, once the identity is compromised, how is that data being interacted with? Is there anything abnormal that is happening? If I'm a data scientist and I need to access a specific, call it S3 bucket or database, that's perfectly fine. But if I take data out in an abnormal way, at an abnormal time, or huge volumes of data that I've never done before, that's where you want to catch, and that's where you want to have the approach of assuming breach. They will be inside. What do you do now? And then obviously, if the data is being corrupted, is being encrypted, well, do you have the ability to recover? So what Rubrik built when we say zero trust is that no one, we're not taking the data itself. We're not working off the data itself. We're working off of the metadata. The solution is not accessed by the network, nor by Rubrik employees or by the company itself. So it's isolated. So the solution itself, you cannot configure it to change the retention policies over data. And then as a security company, we keep tight measures over the actual data that we can access in the first place. So when you allow a tool to scan your environment, what are you allowing the tool to do? How tight is that? Is the questions that you need to be asking any third-party tool. Is my 2 cents and recommendation.
Great. As we're getting close to time here, I just said this in the chat as well. But if anybody has any questions, please drop them in the Q&A box, or feel free to drop them in the chat box below there. This has been great. It's few new things that we didn't even prep for. Just kind of popped up as we were talking through this. Noam. I love it when that happens.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And I just looked at Raul. I hope I managed to answer your question. With, if you check the pricing, you will be pleasantly surprised. Is the best answer I can give on a webinar.
So on the website, you have some pricing information. Then I take it.
Yeah, and I'm mostly into the technical conversations. But Raul, please feel free, or anyone, feel free to reach out. Always happy to have a conversation and a follow-up.
All right, and I do want to draw attention again to the handout. It looks like a lot of people have already grabbed that, so don't miss the handout there. And if there aren't any more questions, then we can go ahead and wrap up here, Noam. I think we've covered the whole topic pretty well. But yeah, and I wish people the best of luck in tackling their data security challenges. I've been there myself. I know how hard it is. So wish everybody the best of luck there. So thanks again for joining me today, Noam.
Yeah, Adrian, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to our next conversation. We literally talked about things as they came along. So I truly enjoyed the conversation. So thank you for having me. Looking forward for next time.
Me too. Thanks again to our sponsor, Rubrik, for making today's webcast possible. And finally, a big thanks to the audience for joining us. We'll see you next time.